I got uninvited from my mom's birthday because I didn't look good next to my sister's boyfriend. Turns out, I was actually his boss. He looked me in the eye and said, "If you still insist on coming home, then don't call me your father." 3 weeks later, the power, water, and internet in their house all shut off, on my mom's birthday. Follow my narrative, perhaps you will recognize yourself in it. Hello, this is Ryan. I'm 30 years old and reside in a little town around 40 minutes from Seattle. Every morning, I make myself a cup of coffee, put on the weather, and drive less than 10 minutes to work. I co-founded a small technology company focused on sustainable energy. Not everyone understands what I do, including my family. They still think I spend my days tightening screws and repairing machinery, which I don't mind. I have never felt the need to explain. When someone asks about my family, my parents or my sister Jessica, I smile slightly. "It's been a while since we talked," I remarked, and that's it. I'm not hiding anything, but I don't see the sense in retelling it anymore. I haven't contacted them in over 2 years. No calls, texts, holidays, or birthdays, nothing. Just a long calm stretch, as if the connection between us had been severed and no one tried to repair it. I used to feel that family was everything. But 2 years ago, on my mother's birthday, everything changed. 2 years ago, 3 weeks before my mother's birthday, I had just booked a trip and taken time off work. The plan was simple: go home early, stay for a few days, and help with preparations, just like every other year. Nothing extraordinary. I just wanted to let them know. I contacted my mother right away, but my father answered after only 2 rings. "I'll be home 2 days early," I announced nonchalantly. "If there's anything you need me to pick up or help with, just let me know." He initially responded vaguely, but then hesitated. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded strange, heavier than normal, as if he was attempting to avoid something. "Ryan, if possible, maybe don't come home this year." At the time, I assumed he was just concerned about my schedule. "It's fine, Dad," I said, still clutching a steaming mug of coffee. "I've got everything sorted, it's no trouble." The pause was longer this time. Then he spoke again, firmer but colder. "Jessica's bringing her boyfriend home this year. He's a manager, someone important. Speaks well and carries himself properly. And your job, well, it isn't very comfortable to talk about, so it's best if you don't come." At that point, I felt heat rising from the back of my neck to my face. My heartbeat quickened, and I automatically grasped my coffee mug closer. "What the hell did you just say?" I exclaimed, unable to keep my voice calm. "Are you seriously saying that to me right now?" He didn't dispute it, take it back, or soften. Instead, he responded plainly and sharply. "You coming home would just embarrass the whole family. If you insist on coming, don't call me your father." And then he disconnected up without a moment's pause. I put the phone down. My palm was still shaking and somewhat sticky from sweat. The apartment was completely silent, no TV, no footsteps, just me standing there, staring into space like I'd been plucked out of my life. His words kept echoing in my head, slow and clear, like a recording stuck on repeat. "You coming home would just embarrass the whole family. If you still insist on coming back, don't call me your father." For a moment, I wondered if I had misheard him, but no. Every word and tone was cold as ice and solid as stone. There was no slip of the tongue and no room for hope. I clenched my jaw, my throat tightening as if something had lodged there and refused to move. Right immediately, memories began to flood back. I silently paid all of their bills, including electricity, water, and internet, for more than 2 years. Nobody ever mentioned anything, and now they're calling me the family's shame. I quickly took up my phone, my hands still slightly trembling, despite the fact that my mind had begun to cool. I opened the banking app and went down to see my transaction history. My only purpose was to see how much I had spent on my family over the previous 2 years. I needed a number for my power bill, water bill, and internet service, every month, without fail. Each payment was handled on schedule and automatically deducted from my account. For 2 years in a row, nearly $400 per month has been paid without fail. I gently scrolled to the very bottom. Total amount spent, $9,842.17. I stared at that number for a few more seconds, not because I was astonished, but because something inside my chest had suddenly settled. Not grief, not even fury, but just empty space. Nearly $10,000, and now they label me the family's shame. As I glanced at the enormous list of bank transactions, a silent question arose, one that no one in my family had posed in 30 years. Has Jessica ever done as much for our parents as I have? It was not jealousy, and I was not looking for credit. It was merely that if I am deemed the family's shame, who is that standard being evaluated against? I had paid approximately $10,000 in living expenses for them secretly, without asking for anything in return, and without ever mentioning it. What about her? Has she ever had to make a sacrifice or beg for help? Or did she arrive, smile pretty, and make an impact in a lovely dress while holding a successful boyfriend? I was not asking to keep score. I was asking because, for the first time, I noticed that fairness was never considered in this household. I'd grown accustomed to standing on the sidelines since I was a child. In family photos, I was frequently partially hidden behind someone else or captured at the edge of the frame. I wasn't exactly gazing at the camera. Nobody ever told me to step aside, but I always did. Jessica was at the center of every important event in our family, from birthdays and graduations to her breakups. There was always a reason for everyone to band together, console, and celebrate her. I can't recall the last time somebody inquired if I was okay. Jessica is 2 years older than me, but the difference between us was never about age. She was the hope, the future-oriented child that our parents proudly mentioned when relatives visited. And me? In the same talks, if I was mentioned at all, it was as a short footnote. Ryan. Oh, he's fine. I believe he works in technology. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, remained out of trouble, and quietly handled everything, they'd eventually see me. However, they didn't. It turns out that when you're used to being invisible, nobody notices when you leave. I began covering my parents' utility costs, electricity, water, and internet, nearly 2 years ago. My mother called first, and everything started there. That day, she moaned about how the cost of living had risen, how this month's bills had unexpectedly increased, and how their retirement income was no longer sufficient. Then, gently and hesitantly, she said, "If you could help us even a little, it would mean a lot." I agreed. At the time, I assumed it would be only a few months until things settled down. However, the months that followed looked precisely like the previous one. Nobody mentioned terminating it, and there was no backup plan. Every now and then, I'd ask, "Is Jessica helping out at all, Mom?" She'd always evade the topic. Sometimes she'd say, "Just help us this month, your sister will pitch in next time." Other times, "Your sister's covering Dad's medical stuff, that's not easy either." I heard those lines so many times I could recite them by heart, and I just smiled and let it go every time, because I knew none of it was true. So I kept sending the money, nearly $400 per month, reliably and quietly, without complaint. Nobody mentioned it. It wasn't that I didn't care, it was simply that I felt it was the correct thing to do. I used to think that if I was quiet and responsible enough, they would notice. But today, after everything, they look at me and say, I'm the family's shame. After a time, everything around me was silent, and I just sat there, paralyzed on the couch. I still had my phone in my hand. I wasn't angry or heartbroken anymore. There was only one clear emotion sitting in my chest, something like, that's enough. Following that, I opened my banking app. I scrolled down to the automatic payments section, where I had set up monthly transfers to cover my parents' expenses for power, water, and internet. I tapped into each thing one by one and canceled them without hesitation. I did it softly, not to avenge myself, but to preserve the one thing I still had. A semblance of self-esteem, the only thing they hadn't taken away from me. About a week later, I received the first message from my mother, in the same soothing tone she always used. There was no mention of what had happened, nor was there an apology. I just got a notice that the internet bill is due. Can you take care of it? I read the message, glanced at the screen for a time, and then placed the phone down without responding. Not because I was attempting to make a statement, but because, after all, the first thing they thought to say was a request. Pay the internet bill. There was no, are you okay? Or even a basic, can we talk? So I remained silent, and that silence, to me, said everything. 2 weeks later, my father called. The phone rang a few times before stopping. I didn't respond. A few minutes later, he left a voicemail. His tone was sharp and impatient, as it usually had been. The power company called. This month's bill hasn't been paid. What's going on? There was no worry, no mention of what he said the day I called to say I'd be home for Mom's birthday. I listened to the message, then turned off the screen and placed the phone face down on the table. And just like that, I remained silent until my mother's birthday. My mother's birthday was around 3 weeks after my father advised me not to come home. The party went on as normal, with her favorite roasted chicken, cake from her favorite bakery, and a few close relatives gathering around the dinner table. Except for me, everything had been meticulously planned and executed. That afternoon, at precisely 4 p.m., I was sitting in my living room with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold when my phone chimed. It was my mother calling. I gazed at her name on the screen for a few seconds before putting the phone down. I didn't respond, didn't even think twice. My dad called a few minutes later, followed by Jessica. 3 calls in less than 10 minutes, I let them all go. There is no curiosity, no one to reply. I stayed where I was, leaning lightly against the back of the chair, my gaze fixed on the fogged-up glass. The sky outside was a drab gray, no rain, but cold in that silent, creeping manner that suggests winter has just brushed up against your threshold. The communications began to arrive approximately 10 minutes later. Mom was first. Ryan, the power has been turned off. The entire house is dark. Please pay the bill. I picked up the phone and read her message in silence. There was no anger or surprise, just a calm hollowness creeping through my chest, the type you get when you've spent years caring for a family and you're the only one left to bear the burden. Then my father said, "No water, we can't cook. Handle it now." Following that, Jessica replied, "Internet's down. Guests are arriving. Please fix this, urgently." I looked at the clock, 5:12 p.m. I remembered clearly, I canceled all automatic payments exactly 3 weeks ago, immediately after my father informed me that if I insisted on coming home, I should never call him Dad again. And now, in the midst of the birthday party they had instructed me not to attend, everything began to shut down: power, water, and the internet. Each one vanished just when they needed it most. I didn't text back or call. I didn't feel the need to explain. I merely sat there, carefully rotating the cold coffee cup in my hands, my eyes still fixed on the window, as if seeing past all I could see. And in that moment, I realized they weren't phoning because they missed me. They were calling because there was no one left to shoulder their weight. Around 6 p.m., my phone began buzzing again, this time nonstop. Yet it wasn't my parents or Jessica anymore. It was the relatives, who only visit on holidays yet feel entitled to pass judgment. The communications arrived in waves. Some people labeled me disrespectful. One remarked openly, "You embarrassed your mother in front of the whole family." Another, more subtle but just as devastating, said, "Your sister was right, people like you shouldn't show up on a happy day." I read through each message without responding, not because quiet implied agreement, but because I'd grown tired of explaining myself to people who always chose the louder throng above what was right. I was about to put down the phone when the screen lit up again. Aunt Lauren was the only family member who still trusted me. She was calling on video via an ancient app that only she and I still used because we were the only ones who cared enough to look each other in the eyes when it counted. I paused for a bit before answering on the second ring. The first thing I saw was her face, somewhat obscured by the yellow illumination from the kitchen behind her, a location I knew like the back of my hand. Every crack in the wall and every noisy cabinet. But tonight the room felt different. There were clinks of silverware, uneasy laughs, and random small conversation in the background. She glanced at me through the screen, her eyes warm and troubled. "You're not going to pay for it, Ryan." Her tone was light, as if she were trying to figure out what was going on. I peered into her eyes, and when I finally spoke, my tone was sluggish, as if I was dragging up something I had buried for too long. "You know, Auntie, it was Dad. Told me not to come." I gulped hard. "He said if I still insisted on showing up, I shouldn't call him my father anymore." She became quiet. Her eyes changed, as if she was studying the room behind her. Right then, the call devolved into mayhem. I could hear my mother's voice through the noise. "Tell him I'm ashamed of him. On this day, of all days, how could he do this?" My father said sharply and loudly, "It's not that serious, it's just paying a few bills. What kind of man gets petty over money?" Another voice, I believe it was my uncle. "Poor Jessica, having to deal with a brother like that." Footsteps approached the camera. Jessica appeared behind Aunt Lauren, arms folded and lips twisted with annoyance. "He even picked up the call? Mom's been crying all day, does he even care? Seriously, no shame at all." I didn't say anything. I just observed and remained silent, as if it were the only way to defend myself. I departed. Just as I was ready to end the call, another face came on the left side of the screen. A young man with perfectly combed hair and a dark suit. He stared at me with confusion in his eyes, then smiled hesitantly. "Hey boss," he replied, his voice somewhat scratchy, as if he wasn't sure if the words belonged in this situation. I froze. My gaze remained fixed on the screen, and I unconsciously grabbed the phone closer. I had not expected this. Not here, not on the night when everyone felt I was too much of a shame to be invited. I stared at him for a few seconds longer, and then it all clicked. His expression, the way he spoke. Of course, he was one of the new personnel who had lately transferred from our southern branch. We'd exchanged a few emails and he'd sent me 2 reports, but I had no idea he was Jessica's boyfriend, the one everyone was trying to impress. The room behind Aunt Lauren appeared to hold its breath. I noticed her look over her shoulder, and the kitchen erupted in a frantic commotion. Then someone said quietly, "Wait, what did he just call Ryan?" Another voice followed, confused. "Boss? Does that mean Ryan is Jessica's boyfriend's boss?" The whispers grew like a rising wave, overlapping and uneasy. And me? I just kept looking at the screen. No nod, no denial. I am simply waiting to see where it goes. And right then, the young man stood up straighter, looked past the camera to the others in the room, and spoke plainly. "In case you didn't know, I work at Pacific TerraTech. Mr. Ryan is one of the company's co-founders." His remarks were crisp and obvious, loud enough to cut through the clatter of dishes and murmuring, and the room fell into an unusual quiet. It's not awkward, simply stunned. I still did not say anything. I pushed my lips together and gave a soft nod of confirmation. He returned his gaze to the computer, eyes wide, and I said calmly, evenly, as if the words had been waiting for him, "Hope your big introduction goes perfectly." Then I disconnected up. That night, I slept soundly, no tossing and turning, no jolting up in the dark with old questions replaying through my mind. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not from satisfaction, but because they finally recognized who I was. The next day, before the sunlight had fully filtered through the thin curtains, I went for my phone and checked my emails as usual. A few meeting reminders, a couple of accounting comments, and then I noticed a name I didn't recognize in the from field. Hudson Kane. I opened the email. The first line struck me immediately. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were Jessica's brother. I've always respected you at the company." I arched an eyebrow, leaned into the pillow, and continued reading. Hudson wrote that he had been truly astonished to discover of the family link between me and Jessica, and then without sidestepping or softening it, he stated, "I didn't expect her to be like that. I'll be ending this relationship. Thank you for not putting me on the spot before everyone." I laid the phone on my chest and closed my eyes briefly. It took me a few minutes to reopen the inbox and begin typing my response, slowly, clearly, and without embellishment. "Hudson, that's your matter. I don't expect anyone to make decisions to stay in my good graces. Think carefully before you do anything. And for the record, I don't bring family into the workplace." I pressed send. No more thought, no lingering emotion. For me, that was sufficient. Some things, once clarified, I don't require anything else. Around 10 a.m., while I was winding up a meeting with the department heads and taking notes, my phone rang in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the name Jessica, my sister. I stared at it for a few seconds before hitting decline, not out of rage, not to make a point, but simply because I'd had enough of apologies that only appeared after everything had already come apart. Within 5 minutes, a message arrived. "I'm sorry. I didn't think Hudson would change like that. You're his boss. If you said something, I'm sure he'd listen. Please talk to him. Ask him to come back to me." After reading it, I approached the hallway window and leaned against it. I reviewed the message several times before typing my response, which was neither too long nor too short for her to understand. "Hudson didn't leave because I told him to. He left because of how you live, how you treat people, how you look down on what you don't understand, and how you always assume that with a soft enough voice you can steer anyone." I pressed send, put the phone back in my pocket, and returned to my desk. However, less than a minute later, another message arrived. "I know I messed up. This time, I mean it. I'll change. Please believe me, just this once." I did not respond. I read it, sat with it for a bit, and nothing moved inside me, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood. Sometimes the distance between two people isn't in the apology. It's in when the apology arrives. I gently deleted the message, leaving nothing behind, and returned to my current life. A week later, on a Friday afternoon, as I walked back into the home from the garage, I froze on the porch. My parents stood at the front door, each holding a little suitcase, their faces drawn with exhaustion from the long travel. I didn't ask why they were here. If they'd traveled all the way out to see me, it wasn't a casual visit. I opened the door and welcomed them in. No tension, no forced politeness, just a simple choice. I didn't want to have that conversation outside, where the wind was picking up on the porch. We sat in the living room, and the tea on the table was still steaming. My father talked first. He apologized in a quieter tone than normal. My mother added to it, saying they'd thought things through, perhaps they'd gone too far, and things should never have come to this point. I remained silent and did not interfere, just listening to see if this apology marked the end of something or the beginning of something else. And, as I expected, my father's tone changed. "We're family, Ryan, and family helps each other. We raised you, sent you to school, everything you have now, a part of it comes from us, right?" I looked at him. My countenance remained unchanged, but my stance straightened somewhat. Then my mother spoke, her voice quiet, as if she were saying something quite sensible. "If you could maybe send us about $2,000 a month, just a little support, it's not much for someone like you." I stared at the two people sitting in my living room, the same people who had once kicked me out of a family event because they thought I was an embarrassment. And now they were sitting in my house, placing a monetary value on their apology. $2,000 each month, because I was their son. And to them, my success was a debt that I owed them. Following their request, I let out a quiet chuckle, not loud or snarky, but the type you get when someone tells you a story that doesn't make sense. I looked at my parents. Their eyes were fixated on mine, as if they expected me to nod in accord. But I wasn't angry. I'd come too far to be bothered by stuff like this. I leaned back in the chair, my voice calm and clear. "What about Jessica? How much will she be contributing each month?" The room appeared to pause at that point. The air tightened. My father cast a peek at my mother. She responded slowly, her voice falling slightly. "Your sister's job, it's still unstable. And the breakup with Hudson has taken a toll on her." I nodded softly, not surprised. The same old excuses dressed in empathic language, but they were merely deflections. I raised my gaze, looked squarely at them, and said, "If she agrees to support you with $2,000 per month, I'll do the same, no more, no less." They didn't say anything, just gazed at me, trying to figure out if I was serious. I went on quietly. "Or, if you want me to carry the full amount, I'll need something in writing. A legal agreement confirming that after you both pass, the house will belong to me in full." I sat still after that, no pressure, no further explanation, just waited to see how they'd react now that, for the first time, I was establishing the terms for something they'd always felt was my responsibility. As soon as I finished speaking, the audience fell into a deep, dense quiet. My father suddenly rose to his feet. He smashed his palm down on the hardwood table, tipping the teacup over and pouring its contents down the side. His shout echoed around the room, his chest rising and falling in fury. "You're setting conditions for your parents? We raised you for over 20 years, and now you want to nickel and dime us like this? What kind of life are you living, huh?" He was shouting so loudly that I wasn't surprised if the folks next door heard everything. I didn't move or flinch. I just sat there, hands resting on the chair's armrests, gaze fixed on him, not cold, but no longer gentle. I waited for him to finish before standing up carefully. My voice came out low and calm, yet clear enough to pierce through the chaos he'd just created. "I think you both should leave my house." It was not a threat. It was not spoken in anger. It was merely a plea from someone who had reached the limits of what respect could provide. No one said anything else, only the sound of baggage dragging across the hardwood floor and the door clicking shut behind them, quieter than all they had just left inside me. It's been 2 years since I last saw them, right here in my own home. I did not ban their phone numbers, change my email address, or cut them off totally. I stopped reaching out and waited. I waited to see if they would still consider me a member of the family after I was no longer under the shadow of duty and obligation. In the past 2 years, there has been no call or message inquiring how I've been, no mention of birthdays, health, or even a basic "how are you doing?" I used to believe that one day, they will change. However, I've realized that not everyone changes, especially those who have never recognized they were wrong in the first place. I still live here, work, and go about my daily existence. The only difference is that I no longer allow myself to be an emotional ATM, eager to give and be damaged in the name of obligation. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that family is not a place where people can demand kindness and call it love. A real family is one in which you are valued as a person regardless of what you have to offer. Not as a wallet, not as a backup plan. Not as a last resort when everything else fails. And before I end this chapter, I'd like to ask you a question. Was I wrong to decide not to return? For refusing to assist my parents with $2,000 per month, despite the fact that they are now elderly and reared me. I used to believe that my family could fix anything. But after being treated like a stranger in my own home more times than I can count, I chose to stand up and break the cycle. Was I overly cold? Perhaps I was finally learning to appreciate myself at the perfect time. Please leave your opinions below. I sincerely want to hear from you, whether you agree or disagree. If the tale resonated with you, please subscribe to help support the channel. There are still many stories waiting to be told and heard. Take care, and see you in the next one. Thank you for staying till the end. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.